Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Create a Quick, Great Tone. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I'm actually surprised I haven't done a dedicated video on, at least I don't think I have, because this is a question that I've seen arise a lot, and I've personally been asked a lot, and not only asked a lot, but have had folks argue with me a lot about, and that is the difference between the channel volume and the master volume on Line 6 Helix or HX Stomp or even Pod Go amplifier models. There's a lot of confusion. I mean, I know a lot of folks out there already know the difference, and this is not even something they need to watch, but there does seem to be a lot of confusion, especially maybe among new users of the Helix. So today I wanted to do the definitive video that puts this, shall we say, argument or discussion or question to bed and just get it over with so that we understand the difference between these. So what you're going to find on most Helix amp models is a gain control. We're going to have a channel volume. We're going to have a master volume. Now the question is, folks say, if I just want to raise or lower the output volume of my Helix amp model, do I use the master volume to raise it or lower it, or do I use the channel volume? Most folks are asking that they want to either reduce or increase the volume without actually affecting the tone, the amount of distortion of this preset they've set up. Maybe they love just the perfect edge of breakup tone they've dialed in, and all they want is a little more volume coming out of the amp block into the next block, or just, if that's the last block or the only block, just out into our final destination for our tone. So the short answer is this: the channel volume is going to allow us to increase or decrease the output volume of an amp block without affecting the tone. It's just going to raise or lower the volume. It's not going to add any nonlinear distortion characteristics. It's not going to give us more breakup or less breakup or more overdrive or less overdrive. It's simply just the final output volume of the amp block. So it's that simple. There's no argument here. That's a well-known fact. The master volume is actually controlling the power amp section of the amp model. So the harder we drive that, the more we're going to get those virtual power tubes working, which is going to affect the tones. So if we crank the master volume up on most models in the Helix, we're going to get more power amp tube breakup, and it's going to affect the tone. Will it make it louder? Yeah, quite possibly, and usually it will. But it's also just going to break up those power tubes. The gain control is controlling the preamp section. So the more we push that, the more overdrive and distortion we get. I think that one's the more obvious one. I don't usually hear any confusion with that because folks just know when I turn the gain up, the amp starts to distort more, and that's the preamp tubes, or in this case, the virtual preamp tubes are being driven harder and giving us more saturation. Now, I've given this answer to a lot of folks, and I've actually had some folks argue with me in the comment section of YouTube, or argue with me saying, no, I think you're wrong. The channel volume is going to give us more gain. And I mean, this is pretty easy to tell just by listening. But today, as I like to do, I'm going to put an end to this discussion and just prove to you in as scientific a manner as is possible that the channel volume is just simply an output volume. It's not going to affect the tone, and the master volume is. And you might ask how I'm going to do that. Well, let's do this. Let's go over to Cubase and HX Edit, and I'll show you exactly how we can prove this. Here we are over in HX Edit, and you might look at this and wonder, what the heck do I have going on here? Well, I have Cubase set up here with the Line 6 Helix as an audio interface, just via USB. I have two paths here on the Helix setup, and as you can see in HX Edit, both are essentially identical except for one thing. I have the guitar input on both. You can see I have the gate off, so there's nothing else. Global guitar pad, everything's the same going into both. As you're going to see in a minute, I've just copy and pasted the identical amp model, in this case the Rev Gen Purple, going through a 412 Greenback 25. You can see that the settings are identical on both. Same microphone, same cabs. That's going to be very important. And then I have nothing else on the path, and I have simply going into the USB 3.4 output for path A and the USB 5.6 output for path B. Now, you might say, well, why did I do that? Well, I've directed those to two tracks in Cubase. So this first track, Guitar 1, is this upper path. You'll notice I have it set to input 3.4, which would correspond to the USB 3.4 up here. And guitar 2 is set to accept the signal from path B here on input 5 and 6, which is set here. So what we're actually hearing when I play this is both of those playing at the same time. Now you can hear if I panned these out left and right. If I mute one, we just get less output. Now, you might ask why I'm doing that. Well, there's a really interesting test that I've used before in some videos called a null test. So if I have two identical tones playing and I flip the phase on one of them, if they are truly identical, they should cancel one another out and we will hear nothing. Let's try that and see if these tones are truly identical. You'll notice that as soon as I do that, and I let my output meter here just kind of fade down, when I'm playing, I'm still getting the input signal coming to guitar 1 and guitar 2, but there's no more output, there's no more sound. So this null test proves that these two tones are identical, as they would be. I mean, why would they not be? All the settings are the same. So this is a very important way to prove that I'm not up to any trickery here. I'm actually playing through two paths that are giving me the identical tone. As soon as I remove that phase switch, I get my tones back. Okay, so you might ask, well, how can we use this to prove anything? I say, well, very simply. If I was to come up here and keep one of these with their phase switch flipped on to the 180-degree setting, it's canceled out. Now, if I come to channel 1 here or guitar 1 and even raise the channel volume by 0.1, watch what happens. You'll notice we now start getting some signal. Very low signal, mind you, but it does not take much for us to change something between the two amps, and you'll see, start getting a little bit of signal here from it. If I go back to the same settings, that just fades off into oblivion and we get nothing. So if I was to take this channel volume and crank it up to, let's say, 8, my null doesn't work anymore. And it's obvious why. I'm getting two different sounds. One volume is louder than the other. Now, if the channel volume had actually changed anything in the tone, like as far as what a master volume actually does, which would be adding more distortion characteristics, it would be impossible to get these two sounds to null by simply going to the output block here. But now you'll notice here, if I go to the output block and start raising this, we know that the output block just gives us clean output gain. There's no distortion characteristics. There's no non-linearities to it. So as I raise this, I should hit a point, and I'm not really sure where because the channel volume isn't just an arbitrary number from 0 to 10, but this is in decibels. But as I raise this, I should be able to get this to null, and let's try somewhere there, maybe around 7.1. .2, and look at that. We have our null back. If I take this out, we have two identical sounds again. And they null perfectly. So that shows you that if I simply raise the channel volume up to 8 instead of 5, all I've done is the same thing as affecting the output block. I mean, obviously, if we had any other blocks after this, we would have to take that into consideration because we're going to be sending more signal into that block. But the clean output volume of the Helix here at the output block is exactly the same as the channel volume. But does the same thing apply now for the master volume? And let's just reset everything back to where we had it. Now, if I was to take this same setting here and say, okay, well, let's crank the master volume up to 10 and see what we get. Now, if I flip the phase on either of these, obviously it's different. One has a master setting of 10, one has a master setting of 5. But again, if I go and bring this output block up, you would think maybe they're going to null again. But in this case, they absolutely are not, because the master output is affecting, like I said before, the tube power section or the virtual tube power amp section. It's going to add more saturation. Whether we can even hear it or not is going to depend on how in tune our hearing is to this type of thing, but we don't want to rely on our hearing. We want to rely on a null test here. So let's see if we can get this to null again by doing something similar. You'll notice we're now getting louder. So somewhere in here, you'll notice you can tell how close to a null you're getting by this number here. I'm at minus 20.4, which is really a terrible comparison. Minus 20.1, minus 19. Now I'm back to minus 21. It's kind of tedious to watch this, but you'll notice that I can't find a place where it even fades away close to nulling, which tells you that there's something much more going on when we go and crank the master volume. We are adding other characteristics, non-linear characteristics, distortion, overdrive, however you want to describe it. Those power tubes breaking up, but I cannot get it to null no matter what I do, as you can see here. There's always some remainder in the sound, and that remainder is the difference between those two tones. So that really proves very much beyond the shadow of a doubt that we are dealing with two very different things. The channel volume, again, I can come in here and crank this up to, let's say 7.5. I don't have a null, but I can very easily raise this up in a matter of very little time and have those things null perfectly. And there's some little sweet spot in here where it's going to work just perfectly. Probably somewhere around there. And there you have it, right? So even a different saying before, but it's very easy to get those two to null using the channel volume and output volume. So basically that proves the channel volume is just giving us clean volume. We can either raise or lower our volume of our amp model without affecting the tone. Now keep in mind, it is the output of this block. It could possibly affect another block after it. If I have a linear block, which isn't affected by how much volume goes into it, then it's not going to affect. But if I have something like a compressor, maybe an LA Studio comp, that is going to be dependent on how much volume is hitting the front end of it, obviously the channel volume is going to affect whatever happens in the next block. But just to simplify, the channel volume will not affect your tone. It will simply make that tone quieter or louder. The master volume will affect the tone. It will potentially make it louder, but it's also going to add more saturation or breakup of that virtual power section of the amp. And obviously I didn't even talk about the drive, but I think pretty much anybody can hear that we get more saturation when we hit those preamp tubes. Obviously, there's going to also be a volume jump there. So basically, if you're running your master, your drive hotter, and it's bringing the whole level of your amp up, then maybe you have to come to your channel volume and compensate in a way that's not going to affect your tone by bringing it down, or vice versa. If you're bringing your drive down and you need to compensate to get more output volume from your amp, you're going to come to the channel volume for that clean output volume. All right, I hope that puts that question to bed now and that we don't have to keep going over that. I know there's some folks out there that are going to say, well, duh, everybody knows this. But quite honestly, everybody does not know this. I get this question, I can't tell you how many times, and I see the question asked in different internet groups and internet forums, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to do a definitive video on this and talk about just that. I have talked about this topic in other videos, just discussing it in combination with maybe dialing in an amp or whatnot. But I thought, let's just do a video where we put this to bed for the final time. And then if you want to point anybody to this video that does have this question, hopefully that will convince them beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is how this works. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like the video and please share this video with anybody who you think would get some enjoyment, but also use out of it to help them to be able to create their tones in a more efficient manner and coming from a place of knowing for certain what these controls are doing. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I will be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for sharing your time with me. Ciao for now.